everybody. I've talked about this on the show before, and it really boils down to fixing problems that don't need to be solved. And in a lot of cases, it's kind of baffling to me, and in many frustrating in other ways, because I think there are a lot of problems to fix in comics, many of them. Across the board, I think there's problems with how the contracts are set. I think there's problems with how the comics are being marketed right now. I think there's problems with I think it's been shown over and over again that if you have a committed creative team, if you have a group of people that are really into the product that they're making, they love the comic, they're in there for the long haul, they're making long term plans, that it pays off in money, in revenue, in subs, in everything. It pays off in all the good ways. And yet, comics as a structure often does the opposite of that. They keep everything short term. And so they give away that value consistently. But for all the problems that do need to be solved, there's an equal number of problems that don't need to be solved that the comic industry seems obsessed with focusing on. Let's talk about those. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. And as kind of in many ways, this recaps other things I've said in other videos. So click away now. No, I'm just kidding. It is. It is true to me, at least as I look and I hear. Well, I don't know if any of you guys have the same experience, but I'll wander into a conversation, and it's especially rare when it's coming from the publishers. Publishers don't like to admit when anything is wrong. And in fact, even within the own comic industry itself, with creators, everyone, people are very leery, very uncomfortable talking about problems. If you start talking about problems, then 50% of the time you're going to be labeled as part of a hate group just for saying there's a problem, regardless of what that problem is. So you have to be careful in how you discuss it. And I see a lot of people inside of comics, creators and everything else, when they bring up a problem, they couch it in the softest possible terms. It's like, hey, here's this thing, and it's kind of a problem, but maybe other people have other opinions. It's just my opinion. I'm not. You don't mean anything by it. Nobody be offended, please, please, please. It's weird. People go to great lengths, bending over backwards to, be careful not to be perceived incorrectly. But when problems do come up from the industry, my ears perk up. I'm really interested because I want to see, how is the industry talking about itself? How is it reflecting on some of the issues it has? And what are the solutions to these big problems? But a majority of the time, the problems that get discussed are not problems. They're not problems. They're things that I hear it and I'm like, oh, that you don't need to solve that. Maybe it doesn't matter, or maybe actually I'm worried that you're bringing this up at all because any solution, any attempt at the solution is likely to have the opposite effect. It's likely to actually cause problems, not solve them. A classic one is this idea of, you hear people are tired of superhero books. People are tired of Kate books. We gotta get away from Kate books because it's a problem. It's a problem to attract that diverse audience. We got to get away from Kate books. Now, why anyone could say that with any kind of straight face, while the number one moneymaker at the box office by a huge mile are superhero books. It takes some balls to come out there and say that when it flies completely in the face from all financial data that is available. Now, please, if you don't like superhero books, that's cool. You don't have to, and that's totally fine. And they need to focus on you as an audience too, assuming you're coming with some money. But trying to solve the superhero comic problem is dumb. You don't need to solve that problem. You need to figure out how to maximize revenue from it. You need to make sure you don't go stale. You need to make sure that that market is growing and evolving and responding to customer feedback and all that kind of happy stuff. But solving the superhero comic problem is bringing a solution to it's knocking on a closed door. I guess that's a term from Europe. Knocking on an open door, knocking on a closed door. It's like you're telling me something that I'm excited to also do. That's knocking on an open door. Versus you're telling me something that doesn't need to be solved. That's knocking on a closed door. It's a little bit of trivia for you. Anyway, other ones are it's the biggest problem in comics right now is that readers do not know where to begin. They come into a comic shop and they see a bunch of comics on the shelves and they're completely intimidated. They have no idea what's going on. So we absolutely need to reboot and relaunch this comic, because if it doesn't say number one, people aren't buying it. Uh, there's any statistical data will tell you that's not true. Anything. You could look, you could go anecdotally and talk to a comic shop, or you can just look at your very own sales data. We know that's not the case, and we know it from many different directions. We know it's not the case. It is, you know, people are obsessed with this idea because it's a convenient way to say, hey, these comics that we're making are not getting the same sales they used to get. We're not making progress on this book. Let's relaunch and buy ourselves some more time. Because when you reboot, you will get a temporary sales boost, but you're not getting that temporary sales boost from a new audience. You're getting it from the collector market. You're getting it from the speculators. You're getting it from that old audience that you don't want anymore, or that you're trying to get away from. So the funny part in comics right now is that you hear people talking about how the speculator market, the collector market, kind of that 30 to 40-year-old market, is going to disappear one day, and we need to find the new market, right? This is something that's said often. Now, I think that expression in and of itself is often a little disingenuous in how it comes out, but let's assume for a moment it's true. You've got these people, they're aging out, and we need to get that new market going. The solution that the comic industry has tried to install for itself is to relaunch things with a bunch of new number one issues. Weirdly enough, as I've said other places, that has a high greater chance of of disenfranchising the new audience, of making it too weird for them to come in. And instead, it's playing to that collector speculator market that you say is going away. That's the group that tends to be incentivized by number ones, cover gimmicks, and the like. Think of it this way. Let's say you're you're new to comics, right? You haven't collected comics, but you're curious. You're comics curious. And you walk into a comic shop and you see Spider-Man there. You know Spider-Man, you just came out of that movie and you're interested to see Spider-Man. Now, comic publishers will tell you, hey, that's why you need a number one or some new issue for them to jump on board with. The problem is that marketed that way, a floppy on the shelf, not a trade paperback. We're going to get to that in a second, because it will sound like I'm saying contradictory, but I'm not. A floppy on the shelf that says Spider-Man, like Maximum Overdrive, number one. Nonstop action, I think. Isn't there's a nonstop action Spider-Man comic coming? Spider-Man number one. Now, here's the interesting part. The customer will know that that's not truly a number one issue. They know this because they just came out of a Spider-Man movie. Whether they've collected comics or not, they are aware of the fact that Spider-Man existed prior to them coming into the shop. So they know that number one is not truly number one. Even though they know nothing about comics, they will look at that and go, I'd like the real number one. I'd like to, that's not, this thing that is out there. And the comic shop owner is like, oh, that's a new number one. It's a way to jump in and get some Spider-Man action going. Some readers will go for that as saying, hey, here's some, if it's marketed correctly. But that usually requires some level of comic shop person intervention. Most people coming in are aware that the comic existed in the past, and therefore they're going to be looking for something that's going to reinforce that view. What do I mean by that? That's where, when you get to trade paperbacks or anthologies or whatever it is, having the simple number one on the spine that's collecting the issues you should logically start from is going to appeal to that sensibility of that customer. That customer is going to come in expecting something like that. They're not going to come in expecting a number one, a $3.99 on the shelf number one. I would argue in many ways, I think I have before, that for people who are brand new for comics, your customer journey, as a new term, but this is the idea of every customer who comes in as a new customer, transitions to a slightly educated customer, becomes a regular, becomes a seasoned customer. There's steps along the way, and you expect different things on each one of those steps. I think customers that come in at the beginning are looking largely for anthologies or trades or some collection that's going to get them up to speed on whatever it is that they're interested in. If it's One Piece, they're looking for One Piece Volume 1. That's going to have a decent collection of stories that are mainly going to start you at the beginning, whatever that means. The new customer doesn't really need to know the details. They don't need, for example, with Spider-Man to see Amazing Fantasy 15 and then Spider-Man #1. That stuff is irrelevant to that customer. They're not going to understand that, and nor should you try and educate them at that moment. What you should do is get them in with a simple volume that is a #1. But again, that's not a floppy on the shelf. That's something that is going to truly be the first appearance of Spider-Man, as well as some follow-up adventures. That's what people are going to want to see. Think about it this way. If you had somebody who watched the most recent Spider-Man movie, the Far From Home movie, and they're like, you know what, I want to go read comics, and they pick up a Spider-Man book, they're not going to be turned off by the fact that there's this 1960s Peter Parker, Steve Ditko drawing where it's got his origin and it's drawn, and they're going to kind of expect that because in their heads they know that Spider-Man existed in the past, so they're going to expect something that looks like art that maybe is not modern art. They're going to expect something like that. Then the customer moves on to intermediate, where the customer now wants to maybe say, okay, I've read the basics, now I'd like to get caught up on current adventures. That's where they're ready to hop on to the start of any arc or any story. They're not going to really be intimidated by a #1 because you've already broken that psychology down with the customer. You're now in a world where you can sell comics to them. And now what's going to be the barrier is things like price. So going back to the premise of the entire video, solving problems that don't need to be solved. I cringe when I hear certain things that are not relevant to the customer experience, to that customer journey, because all it means is a bunch of time and energy is going to be put in solving something that at best customers will ignore, and more likely, at worst, is going to further confuse customers. Confusion is death in the comic industry. This has been said over and over again, not just by my channel, but everywhere. Confusion is what hits sales. Confusion is what hurts. And frankly, for a lot of the crowdfunded books on the outside that are not Marvel and not DC, but these indie guys who have done crowdfunding, where they have been successful is that they've taken confusion out of the mix. It's here's a comic. It's maybe a higher price point. It's $25. It's expensive. But here's a comic. It starts you. It's you're getting everything you need right here. This is where you begin, right at this place. Start here. There's no confusion. I think over time, especially with some of this crowdfunded the stuff that comes on, it's going to have to either transition outside of crowdfunding to some kind of sustainable subscription model, or it's going to suffer the same fate where suddenly it's like, well, wait a minute, this is I pull a name out of it. This is Jawbreakers 4. Why do I need to find Jawbreakers 3? How do I? It doesn't translate as cleanly, and it's just, but this is all just kind of business 101. This is normal customer behavior. This is customer psychology, and this is how it tends to work. If you avoid that, you wind up solving problems that don't need to be solved. This is the same kind of thing as like Superman is stale. People are bored with Superman. Is that true? I don't know. Probably not. But let's say that this gets fixated in somebody's head as a problem. Now we go about trying to solve that problem. But the problem is all we do is further complicate or convolute Superman. If we say, hey, we don't have enough women reading comics, I know. First of all, is that a problem? Not people are going to be crazy by hearing me say this, but no, the problem is not, hey, we don't have enough women reading comics. The problem is actually, hey, we don't have enough money coming in from different markets. We haven't diversified our incoming revenue from enough places to protect ourselves if one of our markets starts to get bored or not read us as much anymore or go somewhere else. One of those markets might be women. Okay, cool. Have we investigated to see if women want comics? If they do, how do we go tap that? And there's answers to all these questions. They're not just hypothetical questions thrown out to the world. For example, do women want comics? Sure. How do we know? Well, Raina Telgemeier is killing it over there with YA girls for those books. That's her market, and she's doing really good. Great. Does that group have money? You bet your ass they do. They have money because they're, look, she's making millions of dollars off those books. We know they're being sold. Can we go get that money? Okay, that's a great question. Can you? If you're Marvel and you're known for publishing like the Avengers and X-Men and other things, well, you have a problem. The Avengers and the X-Men properties are probably not going to appeal to the Raina Telgemeier audience. So how do you do that? Well, you can spin off one of the Avengers like, the Unstoppable Wasp, and you can make it kind of feel like a Raina Telgemeier book, but is that going to work? Are you getting it to that audience? Where are you selling it? Not the same place as Raina Telgemeier is selling her books. You're selling it in the direct market. Okay, that's problem number one. Hey, 2 copies of The Wasp equals more than I'd pay for an entire, 120-page graphic novel from Raina Telgemeier. That seems like a problem. Okay, but you can break these things down and you can start to attack it that way. But instead, the comic industry does get obsessed with, hey, we need more female viewers. Therefore, I don't know, hire some women because women they'll read anything that women do. So as long as women write things for women, then we're sold. And then you come back 4 or 5 months later, it's like, oh, crap, none of this worked. Why not? Well, because that was a stupid business plan. Of course it wasn't going to work. If you're going I'm just repeating myself at this point. Look, I think that comics has a lot of problems that need to be solved. I don't think we have the time mostly the time. We don't have the time to mess around with solving problems that are either unsolvable or not real problems. We don't have the time. We got to get everybody focused, solving actual things that are going to put dollars in the pockets of publishers and creators and build market share, give people what they want to read. It all works together. If we're solving problems that do not align to one of those goals, we're wasting our time. And if we're wasting our time, then becomes the argument, okay, are we in it for art or are we in it for profit? And if you're in it for art, I know a lot of indie creators who are not trying to become millionaires, and that's totally fine. If you know that going in, that's your stated purpose and you know what you're after, great. No, that's all right. Not everybody is out to be a giant millionaire capitalist. That's totally okay. You may be creating art. That's admirable. Good for you. You're keeping it pure. But if you would like money, then you're going to have to play the game of delivering what your customers ask for. Anyway, I've talked enough. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. You have social media, email, all those kind of things. Most importantly, thanks for listening.